Pythagoreans' implications for modern debates on social justice. And so it's wonderful to have you here, Michael.
Well, I would like, first of all, to thank Sandra and David for the kind invitation. I enjoyed very much to be here and especially to participate in these marvelous discussions. Also, it is a special treat to be here in the Robert S. Jepson Hall, and I just looked at the homepage of the Jepson Studies in Jepson School in Leadership Studies. And I especially like the motto in a conference, in an address to graduate students in 2005, I believe. Robert Jepson said, "Dare to dream. All great achievements began with a dream." And in this spirit, I brought here a license for dreaming. So maybe this motto should also be illustrated by appropriate things. So I would recommend this with the school. So if you doze off, you are excused as following Robert Jepson's imperative. I have been working on this topic for a very long time, and all the times I started before, it ended up in a manuscript of 150 pages, so I had to start again because I, at one time, wanted to have an article out of it. Now this is the very first time that I have something fairly concise. Unfortunately, I had to cut it down a little bit, and so I will stick very much to the manuscript, I believe, and I hope it is not too dreary. As you see, this is a very great program. If I have 2 minutes for every slide, then we will do it in 40 minutes. Okay, I will start right away. Okay, my topic is Aristotle against the Pythagoreans. If you look at Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which was written in 330 BC, you will see before Christ, okay, let's stick to before Christ. You will see that Aristotle quoted a then already ancient proverbial rule of Relevance, as a man's action, such his fate, then justice shall be true and straight. In Greek mythology, Radamanthus is a judge in the underworld. In English, it is the word Radamanthus stands for strict and correct justice. Actually, the rule is a variant of the biblical an eye for an eye, and Aristotle comments on the rule, this is not justice at all. And he gives an example, saying, for example, a policeman performs his duty, he hits an offender, then the offender cannot claim for himself the principle of just retribution, an eye for an eye or a hit for a hit, when he hits the policeman likewise. So has here some idea of appropriateness, and he claims that there is a school of justice which lacks this idea, and that is the Pythagoreans. You recognize what I mean. All this is a debate in the context of a taxonomy of justice. Many of you probably know it, but nevertheless, let me say a few words about the background. Especially, well, I cut this very short because I talked at the beginning dinner to Nathan, and he recited what I now try to tell you. Aristotle, Aristotle's teacher was Plato, and Plato in turn followed Socrates. These were the three giants of ancient Western thought, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The amazing thing is that they all knew each other successively, learned from each other, and Aristotle, the youngest of these, then was the teacher of the young Alexander the Great, who became one of the most impressive historical figures. he conquered all the empires, the available empires of his time, up to the borders of China, and changed the world dramatically. So, an aside, I think Aristotle should be definitely taught at the Jepson School of Leadership Studies, especially since Aristotle stressed arete, excellence, a concept which Robert Jepson said speech also stressed very much. It is to a large extent through Aristotle that we know much about the mindset of the ancient Greeks, and also very much about the Pythagoreans. In Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, we encounter a taxonomy of justice, and I quickly reproduce it. There is general justice, just following the law, and particular justice. This particular justice has two subdivisions: distributive justice and corrective justice. The distributive justice is about getting a fair share, and the corrective justice is keeping what you own. That is each one chapter, and then he continues, and that is now where the topic starts. He says there is reciprocation in all sorts of life, and as we just saw the example about the policeman and the offender, there is also a sort of reciprocation, but he thinks especially of economic reciprocation. And as such, it is about getting and giving. And Aristotle's accusation against the Pythagoreans is that they really do not respect neither distributive nor corrective justice. The implication then, of course, is that he thinks that he does with his concept of justice, but we know nobody knows really for sure what he meant with Pythagorean justice, nor what his own sense of justice is in that connection. So we have to really reconstruct it, and mankind has been pondering for 2,000 years about this, and so my little contribution will come here. The context in which he discusses, he continues then discussing after these preliminaries, and very important is here what I have here as an insert. What brings about proportional reciprocity is the coupling of diagonal opposites. Let A be a builder, B a shoemaker, C a house, D a shoe. The requirement is then that the builder receive from the shoemaker what the shoemaker has produced, and that he himself gives the shoemaker a share in his own product. Okay, now what shall we do with a sentence like this? For thousands of years, yes, I think probably 2,000 years, or at least 1,000 years, people have produced a picture like this. You find it in the very earliest manuscripts, that there is a square, and on each corner there is a letter, A, B, C, or alpha, beta, gamma in the case of Aristotle, and then you have the entities, shoemaker, house, and shoes. Well, the essence of this all is, one commentator says, what emerges from this obscure passage is a picture composed of the production and marketing determinants of the exchange rate of commodities. I think one can say at least that much. Now, some people think highly, and there is a very prominent historian of ancient economic thought, Pythagorean, and he invoked this very picture, and he says, Aristotle's basic theories of exchange were at the elbow of every educated European for 500 years before they were introduced with innocent originality in the last century. So the theory is very much of the thought with which we work now as economists was shaped by the reception of Aristotle and via this picture. But you cannot, the picture itself is as uninformative as the text, to my mind. So you must start anew, I think. Now, my new start is this one. And it is just the start. I will work on this. The idea is you you have A, the builder, and B, the shoemaker. Okay? And you characterize them now for the moment by what they produce. The horizontal line here is the houses which the builder produces during the year. Okay? And the vertical line is the shoes which the shoemaker produces during the year. Of these things which he produces, or they produce, they exchange a part. A part they keep at home, the other part they bring to the market. The thing which the builder brings to the market, the houses, okay, you don't bring the houses to the market, but he offers them. These are the quantities. It is the seed goods, but you can measure these goods now in all sorts of things, in money or maybe in labor time or whatnot. Okay, let's measure them in quantities. And the shoes you measure in quantities, and that's why I put a Q before the C and the D. Now, part of the total production is traded, and this diagonal measures the so-called barter terms of trade. You know, the economists know those from elementary economics. There is an exchange rate. The architect or the builder gives up so many houses and gets so many shoes, or the other way around. It is an exchange rate in barter. Now, the correspondence to the exchange rate in barter is the exchange rate in price, and you have also a price terms of trade, which I mentioned, although I do not have prices here. This is only a real model. You see, you have only quantities produced, quantities exchanged, quantities exchanged. So this is really just a real model, but behind this real model there is also pricing, and that is what we have here. And there is now, if we have prices, then I say there is always an accounting equivalent. What does it mean? The price times quantity, the value of houses must be equal to the value of shoes in exchange. Now, for some economists, that is clear. It is a budget constraint. If you want to buy shoes, you must have money, or you must offer something. How do you get money as a builder? Well, by selling what you have built. And the same for the shoemaker. So this always must hold. This is really an accounting relationship. Okay, now this is the basic model, and what can we say about this? Oh yes, well, Aristotle does not use this model. Sorry to have teased you, but let me see. What he says, there must be first of all equality in proportional terms, and reciprocal exchange occurs after that. Now, what could that possibly mean? I think, generations have pondered over this. Now, my result of the pondering is that he says, well, we talk about proportionality. How do you talk about proportionality? Well, there are many ways, but remember, we have here the expressions. We have the expression of the total production of houses, the total production of shoes. Now you can divide this total production by this QC star and QD star. That is the total production. And you can say, please stand through this exercise in algebra, and I know it puts off 99 out of 100 people, but nevertheless I cannot do otherwise. Okay, so you have on top you have that what I just showed to you on the previous page, and you divide it through QC or QC star or QD star, and then you get these expressions. Now if you divide QC star through QC star, you get 1. And if you divide QD star through QD star, you get 1. So you start with a builder who builds houses and shoemaker who makes shoes, and you end up with 2 people who produce 1 and 1. Why? Well, the idea is that you say the shoemaker, when he still has his shoes at home, he has 100%, or the total, or 1, the unit of his total production. And the house builder has 100% of his production at home at the beginning. And of these 100%, then they exchange 20% or 30% or whatever they exchange. So you can have this model which you have in absolute quantities, with which I started. You can have in relative quantities, where the total quantity is always 1. Okay, now I explained this a little bit here in the text, 100% of production. And anyhow, you can then now rewrite this thing. You need, let's see, I think I have here the definitions. You have there this capital Q through capital Q star, and from that you get now, it is cumbersome to transport this through all the text, so just change the notation, and especially interesting is here, you have the quantity exchange of houses in relation to the total production of houses. That's what you have here. And you just give it a symbol, small qc. And you can have the analogous symbol for the shoes, the shoes exchange in relation to the quantities produced is small qd. Okay. Now we have another beautiful picture, and as I said, the total production as a percentage is 100%. If you do not put the 100 on it, it is just 1, and that is what the builder does, is in principle just 1, and what the the shoemaker does is just 1, and out of this 1 they exchange. The builder gives up a percentage of his houses, and B, the shoemaker gives up a percentage of his houses. Now, if it is 50%, then you get this model that 50% is given in exchange, 50% is then gotten back, and so you get this square divided in the middle, and yes, now I must backtrack a little bit. At least now we have the same old model which we had before, which was a rectangle. Now you can have it in this this square. Okay. Now. I will explain later what these shaded triangles are. They are absolutely essential, but maybe before I backtrack now, I tell you what is this. This is equality of income, and this is divergence of income. Because, what Aristotle then writes is, it is not two doctors that become partners to an exchange, but rather a doctor and a farmer. And in general, people who are different, of different sorts, and not in relation of equality to each other. They therefore have to be equalized. Now, whatever equalization can mean, on the one hand, that they are all regarded in these proportions giving 1. But then also you can say, what Aristotle writes here about is a farmer and a doctor. Now the farmer is normally poorer than the doctor, so you have an interaction between one who is poor in society and one who is rich in society. And how does that fit into his model? Now I claim that fits into his model, or the model which we have for equality, then becomes like this. Here we have, what do we have here? The builder, I claim, maybe you think different, the builder is here. Now he has a fairly small income, and we measure the income by this diagonal. And the B, then the shoemaker, supposedly he's a very fashionable one, he is very rich. It turns out then that, as I draw it here, the house builder has to export, has to sell much of his houses for his upkeep, and the shoemaker sells only very little. You remember that is supposed to be the amount which he sells. So all of this is gravely ununderstandable, but it is there in Aristotle, and you see that at some stage Aristotle then writes that A to B is like QD to QC. I reminded myself here that I should explain why this proportion is right, but I think we should leave that to the discussion. As far as this ratio is concerned, which I just mentioned, the text is in the Nicomachean Ethics, and you read then as builder A is to shoemaker B, so must such and such a number of shoes, in this case written as QD, be to a house. Well, it is not to a house. I mean, you always have here the problem. The text is more than 2,000 years old. The translators don't know what it is all about, and we neither. But nevertheless, to make sense out of the ancient Greek with 10 different manuscripts, some only partially surviving, they write here to a house, but the whole context makes it clear that it must be house in the way which Aristotle just before said you should compute houses, namely as a proportion. Therefore, I feel authorized to put this small q c as a house. So he doesn't write a house, but just house. Okay, now I think maybe this circle, Murray Rothbard is quite well known, and it's quite amusing how he vilifies Aristotle. And you see this here in this text. Aristotle's famous discussion of reciprocity is a descent into gibberish. How can there possibly be a ratio of builder to shoemaker, much less an equating of that ratio to shoes and so on? Now, of course, I would not have quoted this if I was not convinced that I can give an answer. And the answer is that Thomas Heath, he has written a book on a long time ago on mathematics in Aristotle, and there he also is rather puzzled by this passage, but then he says, well, probably what A and B means is what they are worth, what they stand for, what they are good for, and what they are good for is how much they produce in a specific time period. Now that is, of course, what does that mean for interpreting Aristotle? Okay, and now some more algebra. I excuse myself, but in really to drive home the point, and against Rothbard, I think we need a little bit algebra. The value of work is, of course, the value of respective own production. The value of own production is, first of all, a quantity. This quantity, we have two quantities, quantity C and quantity star D. Stars. You remember the first equation, total quantity. Now this total quantity, the houses have a price. And what is the income, what is the income good for? Well, that is the total amount of houses which he has produced. Part of it he consumes himself, part of it he sells. But that is the total income. And the total income for shoes is, of course, the total production times the worth of this total production. Now, we said before, the basic accounting of every transaction is that you must pay for what you get. Now, if let's say the house builder gets shoes, okay, he has to sell a certain amount of shoes of houses to have a money worth of houses, and those for that then he buys shoes, and vice versa. The shoemaker sells the value of these houses, of these shoes, and buys houses. Okay, now we have to do some fiddling around with this. Okay, take this equation and just divide it, extend it, enlarge it with QC star, like this. So the value, this value is the same as that because they cancel. But then you can fiddle in this QC, because this QC you get here. The small QC you get there as the large fraction. This small QD you get there as that large fraction. So you get here, put the QC there, you take that from there. Now what is this PC times QC star and this PD times QD star? Well, we have defined them up there. So we have here an expression, income of the house builder times the portion of houses which he sells is equal the income, the total money income of the shoemaker times the part which the shoemaker brings to market. Now, you can rearrange these terms. You keep the A on the left side and bring the B on the left side, and you keep the QD on the right side and bring the QC to the left side. Then you get that. Now, what do you get? You get a ratio, the income of the house builder to the income of the shoemaker is like the proportion which the shoemaker sells to the proportion which the house builder sells of his houses. So it is what Aristotle wrote in that passage, of which Rothbard said it is just gibberish. To say gibberish or gibberish? Gibberish, sorry. Okay, in short, Aristotle does not talk gibberish. His ratios follow some simple accounting of accounting equivalence. So I thought that point was important to be made. Okay, now further topics, accounting and equivalence. I just repeat these. We have now this equivalence either in the form of trade or in the form of income and proportions. Now it becomes important. Well, what I stress is we have here only accounting principles. We have not come to our topic yet, really, namely that is justice. But it is important that we do not mix up accounting with justice. Now, where does justice come in? Justice is some sort of a fairness, and how can we, this is now a bit difficult position in my argument. We have another accounting in Aristotle, because he writes, and that is also something which generations have brooded about, everything must be measured by one thing. In truth, this one thing is need, which holds everything together. Now, how do you measure need? Well, actually what he means is not need, but the satisfaction of need. Why is there exchange? There is exchange because the housemaker has made houses, but he needs shoes for walking around. He has a need for shoes. Therefore, he engages in exchange. If he didn't need shoes, then he would rather exchange for something else. It is that he has to satisfy his need for shoes. And we must have some measure of this satisfaction of need. And now I have to backtrack and look at this first picture again. There we have, you remember, we say of the total production of houses, some are given away and some are retained. And for those given away, according to this exchange rate, the architect gets shoes. So what does he? Can you have a measure for his satisfaction of need? Well, the problem is you have a measure for houses retained in the household, and you have a measure for shoes. But how can you have one measure? Because Aristotle writes you need one measure to measure satisfaction of need. So I say take the area, because the area is one, and the area you get as a multiplication of this side times that side gives you the value, the single value of an area. Or in the case of a shoemaker, you have this as an area for shoes, for the satisfaction of needs in the household of the shoemaker. You see, the problem with the satisfaction of need, it is satisfied by two things, by shoes and by houses. What is it? No, by shoes, this is the shoes retained, and that is the houses which he gets through exchange. So these two things must be collated, must be brought together to one thing, namely a measure of the satisfaction of need. And you can take then this area as this measure. Now, okay, that was this necessary backtracking, and then you can say, well, you can then have these squares as measure for the satisfaction of need. You see here the poor, in this case we have a poor shoemaker, poor house builder, architect. He has to bring a lot of his product to the market. Only little he lives in his house. His product is not well paid in the market, so he gets in return only very little. So he has a small level of satisfaction of needs, whereas the rich guy, he has a high level of satisfaction of needs as measured by these respective triangles. So that is in a way still accounting. We left here. Everything must be measured by some one thing. In truth, this one thing is need, which holds everything together. Okay, now I argue that this is the measure for the satisfaction of need. Now, slowly we come now to justice. We turn now to justice in connection with reciprocation. Note that reciprocity between actors is different from reciprocity for each actor and between actors. Between actors, the money value of sales is equal to the money value of purchases. That is reciprocity. That is accountancy. But the reciprocity for each actor, the second set of reciprocity means that each member of the community of exchange gets from the respective efforts a certain return. The farmer and the physician of the last section each work for 1 year, but the physician is rich while the farmer is poor. Is that fair? Now justice comes in. Is that fair? And the doctrine of strict reciprocity would say, well, of course this is fair. The farmer sells cheap stuff, and the doctor saves lives. So he should get a lot of money, because that is what they bring to market, and that is what the market then really should give back to them. You can now in these pictures, when you have this measure of the satisfaction of need, you can well, then you have a measure, and a measure you can represent. Now I put here some Cartesian curves in a Cartesian setup, which of course Aristotle did not have. But what he had is that he looked at these triangles, and that he looked at the how they behave, how they change when things change. When what things change? Well, when the relative income changes. So we have here relative income. B is as before the shoemaker or one actor. A is the other actor. So now you have either equality, then B. When you have equality, then B is equal to A, and when you divide equal through equal, then you get 1. And then you have this, then you have which picture? Well, then you have this, we'll get to it. Then you have this picture. The triangles are the same, the measure of satisfaction of need is the same. Okay, now here we have B is richer than his triangle is larger than that of A. So how does that translate into this curve? Well, we started from 1, where they are equal. Now if B becomes richer, you go to the right. If B becomes poorer, I show this here, then you have this situation. Then you have B has only a very small triangle, B has only a very small triangle, and A has a very large one. So the measure of this triangle, and I have this X-like letter for measure for the satisfaction of need. Then you see we have here for one a minimum, and then when we have this situation, we have a very large measure for A, but since this is in the denominator, the value is small, so you are here. So for a large income for A, the ratio B to A becomes very small, but the area, the total area of the two together becomes very large. And the idea of this model is that you have the smallest total satisfaction of needs when you have equal distribution of income. Okay? Now, is that well, I must then jump to the conclusion. If this is a picture of justice, it is the justice legitimizing a despot, a pharaoh, or a Babylonian god king. It shows that the concentration of income in one single household, the household of the palace, maximizes the total satisfaction of need. The others then can work in the household and can be happy. It triggers down to them. The household of the palace maximizes the total satisfaction of need. But one could think also of more modern context, which this figure represents. For example, in Hobbes' Leviathan, we have the state of nature. And in that, everybody has the same, when everybody has the same right, they just kill each other. So it is better that there is an absolute monarch who also can kill whom he wants to kill as absolute monarch, but he doesn't do it, and at least my neighbor doesn't kill me, and so I'm better off, although I have absolutely no rights in relation to the absolute monarch. So if you wanted to model something like that, I propose that you model it with my model which I just presented. Now comes something even more strange. my model of Aristotle. The model of Aristotle has the same square, more or less, as the Pythagoreans, but the difference is that in the Aristotelian context, you say there are certain inalienable rights. You must not reduce the other. When you become rich, you must not reduce the other to nothingness, as was the case. You see, remember the picture which we have here. A becomes rich, B becomes virtually nothing, and if you go further, he becomes a slave. But a slave in the house of the pharaoh is better off than a free man on the field, maybe. Anyhow, for the Athenians, that was not debatable. That was an old idea, this isonomia. No matter whether they are rich or poor, you have the same rights as long as you are a citizen. Of course, there were slaves and there were foreigners and so on. But as long as you were a citizen of Athens, you had the same rights. Now, that means you must not reduce A below the status of equality. B can become rich. Nobody is against that. But A must not become poor. The slogan is, I think mentioned it briefly in the discussion, let B become relatively rich. B becomes relatively rich when you extend that. But A must not become absolutely poor. In the Pythagorean model, the other guy was reduced to nothingness. That is not admitted. Now, if you have this type of model, you have a constraint on the model. When this starts ending in slides, so I must work here with the arrow. So this is the state of equality. This is the state of inequality. Now we can again compare the different areas which we get when we change the relative income. We change the relative income. Here now B becomes very rich and A becomes very poor. How does this look? Let us look at the area which measures the satisfaction of needs for this household B. Now, the household, when we have equality, then they both are equal, so you have you have equality there. But then when B gets richer, you see immediately that the richer triangle of the B is larger than the previous triangle. However, of course, the other guy A, his triangle measuring his satisfaction of need shrinks in area. Okay, so what pattern do you have as far as the satisfaction of need is concerned? Well, you have, in the case of B becoming richer, first his satisfaction of need increases, there is a maximum, and after that it decreases. For example, when you have this red case here, then you are maybe on this B to A axis here, and then you see that this is really stupid for the B to become this rich, because his satisfaction of need is lower than the one which he would have in equality. So you get here a totally different graphical figure for the satisfaction of need of the household, of the rich household. Okay, now this is interesting in relation to what Aristotle wrote, because he defines justice in the following way. You see, Aristotle is famous for his doctrine of the golden mean. And how does he define this golden mean in the case of justice? It is plain that just conduct is a mean between doing and suffering injustice. For the former is to have too much, right? The former, doing injustice, is to have too much, to be here, in the red area. And the other is to have too little. That is somewhere around here. And the right situation is in the middle, and you see there B maximizes his satisfaction of need just here. Okay, thanks. Okay, now we have been discussing much about justice and virtue here. Justice is that quality in virtue of which a man is said to be disposed to do by deliberate choice that which is just, and when distributing things between himself and another, or between two others, not to give too much to himself and too little to his neighbor of what is desirable. Now, this is just such a case. The B does not keep too much for himself, but stays somewhere in the middle. So I claim that this model indeed has a relation to what Aristotle wrote. Now you could say, I have not, how come you have this crazy idea of fiddling around with squares and diagonals and whatnot? I was very fortunate for a year ago or so to become aware of these coins from the nearby island of Aegina. The Aegina is on the doorsteps of Athens, and probably Plato was born on the island of Aegina. And there they played with coins of this appearance. They have a square, then these they were cut by these lines, and there were some diagonals. Now, if you draw these diagonals a little bit differently, you get that model with which I tormented you during the last time. Okay, a few reflections on relevance. Well, Aristotle claims that the fallacy in the Pythagorean approach to reciprocation is that it is unqualified. I offered two models. Both models emerge where you're based on proportional remuneration. You always have proportional. These A to B equal QB to QC was always kept in all the models. So this proportional remuneration was kept. But the implicit maximization of the Pythagoreans is to each according to their contribution. You get from life and economic exchange according to what you do and what you contribute. The Aristotelian maxim is the privileged ones may enjoy their relative wealth, but the poor must not fall into absolute poverty. Both conceptions of just outcome of economic exchange can be seen as having modern counterparts. The Pythagorean maxim of you deserve what you get smacks of modern economic nihilism concerning interpersonal distribution. One aspect is marginal productivity theory of distribution. Otherwise, we cannot say anything. This Pythagorean position is there is no social policy, I would say, because it is all you get what you did, and that is it. We may also think in this context of a quote which I just saw in your book, where you quote Popper, behind the sovereignty of the philosopher king, namely the one propagated by Plato, stands the quest for power. Plato, you also have references that Plato really is very akin to the Pythagoreans. So maybe we have here a relation to some things which were discussed in other contexts. Our interpretation of Aristotelian position may also be what might be related to Scandinavian social democracy, and to relate also to this conference. I might quote Christopher Martin's contribution. He quoted from The Wealth of Nations. No society can surely be flourishing and happy, of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. Maybe Smith got this from reading Aristotle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. I should say, before we start force Michael or induce him to cut his presentation down. He was initially scheduled to be in the morning, but because Stefan Koloff wanted to hear order liberalism and needed to fly back to teach tomorrow, we rearranged things somewhat at the last minute, so I'm grateful that you accommodated us. So thanks very much. So, questions, comments? David?
Oh, I think this is much fun. This is such a hard text. And as you say, people have struggled with them for a very long time. And one of the things I got off your presentation is that your figure 5 looks awfully much like an Edgeworth box. And that to make some of the arguments work, I think it's clear you need to make some restrictions on prices. And if there's an old argument, I'm sure you know better than I do, that the scholastics in the old readings made claims about the just price is something that depends on your status. The just price in your terms might be such as to keep you from poverty and that sort of stuff. So if we put some constraints on prices, then we can say something about justice in an Edgeworth box without having to appeal to preferences. We don't need indifference curves or that sort of stuff. We can just work with quantities and prices because we've got some restrictions on which the just part of this stuff is. And so that might be a really interesting way to think about how to move some of these traditional things. Because if you can work with objective quantities, then you don't have the problems about comparing subjective states and that sort of stuff. Fortunately, this is just amateur speculation on core theory because we do have an authority here.
I quickly lose my authority.
Well, I myself, of course, thought for quite some time, how does all this relate to Edgeworth, the Bowley box, and how do they come together? Actually, one would have to write a long book in order to really explicate this, because there is implicit, there is a utility function. You see, because you have here always this equality. You have, especially better in the Pythagorean version, no matter what happens, they divide it up equally. So they have the quantities of shoes, the percentage of shoes. The percentage of shoes matches the quantities of house remaining in the household of A, the builder, or the quantity, and the same for B. So there is an implicit utility function. Actually, you could say a Cobb-Douglas function where they have the same exponent. Anyhow, it is an interesting question. How does this relate to the Edgeworth box, to indifference curves, and yes.
I guess my question was, can you just work with prices and quantities? Because in your earlier argument, you were just working with prices and quantities.
Yes.
There were no claims about utility stuff or anything like that, just price and quantities. And then make claims, say, oh, the normative claims about justice are going to be carried in the price terms. You've got normative claims about prices, and then with your manipulation, and that's going to tell you what part of the Aristotelian version of the contract curve, which is going to be just. And so you don't need the difference curve, you don't need the utility function. You can do everything in price and quantities because you're getting the you're getting something that looks awful like an entry box with just discussions of price and quantity. And so that's, I think, if that's maybe a way to, really answer Rothbard's points. With claims about prices, what's a just price?
Okay, Aristotle doesn't write anything about just price in this passage, and I would say this stress on just price of the scholastics is sort of a misreading. It is not Aristotelian justice is not about the just price, but there is an idea that there should be some justice as far as distribution is concerned. You have this passage in Schumpeter's History of Economic Analysis, where he claims with high authority that there is absolutely no consideration concerning distribution in Aristotle. Now, I would say that is wrong. There is this constraint that the poor, the underprivileged must not become absolutely poor. That is the message which I would get out, and that is a distributional aspect. Now, this distributional aspect can transmit through prices, that you say the prices must not fall too low so that the people have a living. But it could also be transfers. You could say, okay, the rich donate to the community feeds the poor ones so that they have also that they can satisfy their need at least to a certain extent. And then, of course, was the practice in Athens that they had public meals and others contributed, and so that the citizen could participate in these public meals. Then there were contributions. So there was a certain amount of redistribution in ancient times as well. But it is not necessarily through prices. And as far as this is concerned, now that is, it would lead, it is another discussion how prices come in, but of course you see the other side of this price ratio, of this quantity ratio, of the barter terms of trade, is always the price terms of trade. So this line goes back down there, and it is the price ratio. So you always have an implicit price ratio, but no statement concerning justice. It's just descriptive. Where just the discussion of justice comes in is it right that this shaded area or whatever measure you have is small for the one and large for the other, and that of course depends. That depends of course not just on the barter terms of trade, and that is what is bad about our generally used barter terms of trade, because it depends on how much the builder has produced and can keep. So it has two sides, not only how much he exchanges, but how much he keeps in his household, and that is this part which extends now in this case to the left, yes, to the left, which has to be considered.
Yes. Thank you very much for your talk. I learned very much, and I didn't know this Aristotelian approach. But as David was saying, every time that you went over the diagrams, I just kept on thinking about the edge work, because we're actually, in at the Muse School, we constantly, go over the edge work, and actually this also leads into the work, for instance, that Duncan Foley, Hal Varian, and William Walmo have done on the theory of fairness, which I don't know if you're aware of, but basically, for instance, William Walmo has a book on super fairness, that he is just specifically, going about these issues of how, you can use the H work as a tool to tackle these issues of, justice and injustice. And basically the idea there is that you have this key, issue about, whether it's just like going back to the Aristotelian problem that you mentioned. When you cut a cake, what is the correct way to proceed about cutting the cake, and whether or not you have envy, or and how you can reach that optimum, in the actual box. So I just wanted to add that as a comment.
Are there other comments?
only assert that you can establish a relationship to the Edgeworth box, but that would be a rather lengthy thing.
So just a sort of few loose associations. It struck me in your distributional discussion, you talked about sort of modern applications, that there's elements of Rawls in what you're talking about, that there's some sort of, I can't remember his phrasing, some sort of minimum state you're supposed to be at, and sort of some prior thing. So that would be an application, I think, the Rawlsian aspect. And sort of going back to your beginning part of the getting and giving, distributive and corrective, and also some of the comparisons of rectangles that struck me in my teaching recently, that some of the stuff in intellectual property, if you ask sort of what is the compensation for patent copyright infringement, there's two different legal remedies. One is lost profit. So if somebody infringes on my idea, I should be compensated for the profits I've lost. And it's direct hand, price times quantity. But the other measure of remedy is unjust enrichment, which is basically you take away from the person, the infringer, the profits they have, and one can show that that's going to be smaller than the lost profits. But that's sort of a recent application of this kind of comparison that came to mind. So I just want to throw that out. At one point in your presentation, I noticed you had formal and substantive, which brings back issues of Polanyi. We had this past paper about Menger, in the second edition of Menger, the formal and substantive. And I'm not sure, did Menger draw on Aristotle apart? I think he did. So there was that aspect I wanted to mention. And then kind of a final set of issues. We briefly heard about some of the scholastics, but in Christian theology, there is, if you look at the notion of redemption and salvation, there really is this issue of sort of the quality there. Redeeming actually means you're getting back what you put in. I mean, there is that economic theological tone, and there was some of that came in. And just one final point, I was wondering about looking for some of the Greek tragedians as kind of notions of justice and bringing them into this as well.
Well, depending on how much time one has to discuss, one can of course discuss this scheme of getting and keeping and getting and giving. And the rather intriguing thing is you mentioned the formal and substantive equivalence. So one can see a dialectical going apart and coming together again in all this argument of Aristotle. And this equivalence now here has a formal aspect, the accounting, and the accusation against the Pythagoreans is that they take this accounting, this strict imputation as justice, which Aristotle says is not justice. It must be substantive, and all this then I should be prepared also to discuss, well, what is social justice? Well, in the case of Aristotle, it is what wrongly has been often translated as political justice. So you think it is party A gives justice different than party B. No, it is the justice in the polis which keeps the polis together, and that is the substantive social justice, I believe, that is behind Aristotle.
Thanks very much. Let's join me in thanking Mike.